So, hi guys, this is Warren Herman. I just want to make a quick video about how to overcome religious scrupulosity. There, I'd like to just begin by simply saying that, I've been trained as a therapist and nothing that I really did worked. Every technique that I use, so for example, I use techniques where I tried to redirect my mind away from things. I tried to go into situations that would kind of expose myself again and again to situations that I didn't like. That never helped, and it always was a burdensome experience. I tried to, there were different things that, but most things never really worked. And it seemed as if all the time I would have like this thing that I thought was the breakthrough, that I thought was a new technique that was going to work, and it lasted maybe a day. It never worked. And I would even talk to somebody, who was, somebody who I had met, in an online Christian OCD group, and we would just talk about our experiences together, and I mean, that was good. But the thing is that ultimately, one of the things I kept reporting to them was that I kept just seeming to discover the breakthrough or discover the technique that was going to help me. It never really worked. It never was something that helped. It never really stuck. So that's the rundown of things that I tried that did not work. And it was, I believe, that the reason why these techniques did not work was because what I was doing was still rooted in fear. And no matter what technique I used, I still was afraid of the symptom. And this brings us to how we should describe what scrupulosity is. Scrupulosity, I believe, is the symptom of a scared brain. So, for example, it may be that you have intrusive thoughts of blasphemy, impurity, anger, or judgment. And these thoughts are viewed as very important, and things trigger them, and you are again and again beset by these thoughts, trying not to have them, and it's very difficult. So this is the tragedy of scrupulosity. It begins with, I believe, this thing which I call the problem of amplification, that fear amplifies and makes us hypervigilant about incoming stimuli. And therefore, since we are hypervigilant about incoming stimuli, these stimuli are enhanced and made to launch themselves into consciousness, made to be highlighted, so that the mind perceives it. And then, because they are so vivid and so important to the mind, they're so intense, because I don't want to think a judgmental thought. Of course, that's right there, because it amplifies it. I don't want to be attracted to this person. I don't want to be, so therefore it amplifies it. I don't want to, and then you can't even look at people's faces, like after a while, because then it's like because your mind is so hyper vigilant that it begins to highlight people's features of their faces and makes you think you're attracted to them, when really you're just terrified. And the slightest feature of the face is amplified out of fear. And then it begins to become almost a sense of pain as these stimuli are launched into consciousness, and the fear generates almost a kind of pain, sometimes in the eyes or even in the ears, as stimuli that one does not want, or even neutral stimuli. So, for example, if one is afraid of a voice, one may be afraid of the voices of women, for example, if one is afraid of being attracted to others. So, it's like there could be these ways in which fear causes amplification. And so the techniques that I tried to use to overcome scrupulosity did not help, because they again reinforced the fact that something was wrong, something was dangerous, something was a problem. So the fact that I was using these techniques did not help, because I still was in this hypervigilant state, believing that I had a problem, basically. So the question then becomes, what did help? So I was very frustrated with this, and this was an awful way to live, and this lasted for me about 10 years, or something like that, it seemed. And so what I began to do is one day I was just very frustrated. I woke up in the night, I was very frustrated with this, and I began to pour out my heart to God, talking about how much I hated the way that my mind worked. It may not be the best way to pray, but we are allowed to tell God how we feel. We shouldn't just think that we hate everything, but I think we are allowed to say to God how we feel. And so I just talked to God for like 3 hours on my knees, being like, I hate this, I hate that. And later in that day, I felt led to look at videos related to hypnosis. And that was what triggered me to be completely set free from this experience. Because what I realized is that I had read certain things in the light of fear. So I read certain comments from St. Alphonsus about keeping our eyes, keeping custody of our eyes, not looking at anybody. Um, I had read certain things from Father Ripperger, which were very good, but I had interpreted these things that I had read as hypnotic suggestions. Because when we read something, there is both the thing that is being described and our description of the thing. For example, I might have ADHD, and then I have my idea of having ADHD. And what happened is that I developed fearful ideas related to things like concupiscence, related to things like first movements of sin, related to things like types of ways the mind could, like different ways the mind could think. And because I expected these things, because I was expecting things to be this way, because I felt, okay, Father Ripperger is an authority, St. Alphonsus is an authority, my mind then corresponded to the instructions received, as if receiving a hypnotic suggestion. And so my life then, and you might say, how did I realize that this was the case? Well, I realized that this was the case because there were times when if I was in a different type of a trance, because I believe the mind is always in a state of trance, the mind is always in a mindset, the mind is always, we are always kind of in a usual way of thinking until something jars us out of it. And so what happened was that my mind, I realized that there were times, so for example, if I was giving a speech, I would not have these kind of odd feelings with my eyes, where I would feel like almost assaulted by perceptions. I wouldn't have these because I was in the trance of being a speaker, which was slightly different than my trance of being in everyday life. I had later experiences where I was having many scruples, and then there was a need where I had to kind of operate somewhat like a therapist, and I went from my usual me trance to my therapist trance, and my scruples disappeared because it was different mindsets that I'm used to being in. So this type of thing made me realize that there are trances that we are in, and that there are ways in which we are conditioned to have certain perceptual reactions. The mind and the brain are very powerful and can generate responses that can be very complex. Even, another one that made me realize this was the fact that when I would read books related to the 12-step movement or things about Mormonism, I would have sensed certain vibes coming from these things. And it was merely a perceptual hypnosis based on some things I had read about, that I once had believed about some things. And so my these leftover agreements, these leftover hypnotic suggestions were causing these rather complex perceptual experiences. So what's very important to remember is that if there are things that are bothering you, there are hypnotic effects that can easily account for various kinds of mental symptoms. The expectancy we have, the authorities we believe, these things can combine to create various and exotic mental phenomena that can be very problematic. And then the effect of fear is to then amplify these things and then lock them in place. As the psychologist Carl Jung said, what we resist persists. So we have all these layers of mental operations that create complex and persistent phenomena that leads to suffering. And so one time I went on a retreat, and somebody gave a very good comment, which was to help us discern: is this a beam in my eye, or is this a beam on my back? Meaning, is this the cross, or is this a misperception? And of course, any affliction can be offered up. But the best thing to do, we are not called to keep illusions if we don't have to. We are called, the one way I would think about this is we are called to carry the cross. We are not called to carry the shadow of the cross. And so sometimes our perceptions can essentially become some other type of phenomena. And so we have a duty, as St. Ignatius says, to act against scruples, but to bear with sufferings like the dark night of the soul. Of course, we can offer up the sufferings involved in scruples when we can't manage to. There might be some times when the mind is going to be bonkers. But we do have an obligation to see through them. So it's not that we should keep them and not think about how to see through them. Um, and the question is now, how do we see through them? So what happened was I realized that this was a hypnotic suggestion, that I would always react. And it was an expectancy effect. I'd always flinched whenever I would see women. I would flinch whenever I'd see their faces. I would flinch at features of people's faces. I would flinch at specific people. These type of reactions of fear were hypnotized into me. But once I realized that these were like a cue and a suggestion, and that the perception did not, like, that I did not need to have these reactions to seeing faces of people, this turned off entirely. I was shocked. I was completely set free. There were some little bits like of lingering things that I would kind of offer up and whatever and do some different techniques with, but it was an entirely different world. That it was like all of a sudden opened up. It was like instantaneous thing of like, oh, when I look at people, especially when I look at women, this is not what happens. The other thing that's deeply important, this is a very, very important suggestion. I want you to listen to this. That you do not need to have lustful thoughts when looking at people. You do not need to become attracted to people when looking at them. Attraction is a hypnotic thing, which is understood. We can understand that attraction is hypnotic because hypnotic cues are used in attraction all the time. Because people, for example, wear makeup. There are culturally different hypnotic cues. Like in one culture, okay, having a giant nose piercing is attractive. There are hypnotic cues to elicit the trance of attraction that in every culture. And so the thing is, you no longer need to be attracted to anyone. Once you realize that you're like starting to get hypnotized by looking at a person, you just wake up. You don't need to do anything about the trance. You just need to realize that it is a trance. Just wake up out of it. Just snap out of it. Like, just look past it. It's a trance. It's not something to be fought with. It's not something to be engaged with or battled, because it's a dream. So you can't fight with a dream. You can't solve a problem you don't have. And so the thing is, what has to happen is you have to realize that you are beginning to be hypnotized, and then just wake up. And then you've eliminated the very first line in the chain of events that lead to scrupulous beginnings. And so that's deeply important to remember that these are hypnotic cues. And the thing is, if your scruples come from something else, like judgments or angry thoughts or suspicious thoughts, it's very similar. There's a cue, you hear something, you have an unwanted thought. There's ways in which, if you think about this, there's still this conditioned thing. Like, I had a fear, okay, every time, and I'm trying to link it well, I made a whole video on like fake judgments that I think I had a better understanding of it at that time than I do at the exact moment now. But it's very important to realize that we have these things where we are so afraid of having this certain type of thought. We think it's wrong to like have a judgmental thought, that we're so afraid of it. We're waiting for it, and then it comes into our mind, and it's like, oh, I don't want it. Like, why is it coming back? And so it's very difficult. I understand. But the thing to remember is that it's a trance, that you can see past it. And so the question becomes, okay, so then what is concupiscence? Well, I think concupiscence is the fact that we might want to be hypnotized, or that we're broken enough to be able to be hypnotized. It's not the first movements of sin. We have to have, I think, a more nuanced understanding. Like, it's not so solid. It's not so solid. Like, oh, you have a fallen nature, therefore you will be attracted to people, therefore you'll fight with this. Not exactly. It's more like you want to use others to hypnotize yourself, rather than you have to be hypnotized into trances. So the thing is, it's not that you have to be attracted to people. It's even like a normal attraction. You don't have to be attracted to people. You don't have to be worried. You don't have to be afraid of things. But you may have a tendency toward fear, or maybe a tendency to want to be attracted. So maybe these things are the better way of looking at our concupiscence and our fallen nature than just saying, okay, you're going to walk into situations that's going to be dangerous for you. Because the bottom line is to realize the healing of scrupulosity is to realize that we are safe. That's the essential thing. Because really the problem is pressure. So, for example, a scrupulous person, they go to confession and they're under pressure to not have to confess the next 5 minutes. Therefore, their sins are amplified. Their first move is to I can't sin. I gotta not sin. So the thing is, we have to realize that it's really realizing that we're not in danger is the essential treatment. So this brings us to I was doing a course with a guy named Dan Buglio who talks about perceived danger pain, and it's kind of based off of the work of Dr. Sarno. This is usually used for symptoms that are more physical. I did have physical symptoms, and the physical symptoms are substantially resolved by not reacting to them. So for example, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and the thing is, and I'm eating 4 cookies covered in nuts every morning. I'm doing great. I've eaten black beans. I've eaten all these things. These are things like, and I'm not bleeding. There's nothing. So the thing to remember is when we don't react to symptoms, we anti-inflame ourselves. So the thing is, it's like the same type of thing. Like if I would notice some of these symptoms, okay, I'm inflamed. I notice that, and I'm not trying to make this video graphic, but I'm trying to make this a very important illustration because this is very important to realize that these type of fear reactions affect us on so many levels. So I was dealing with this thing. So okay, my intestine would bleed. So then I'd see the intestine would bleed. Then I'd be freaked out that the intestine was bleeding, that I think there's something wrong with me. Then I need to take medicines. Then I'm taking the medicines. It's reminding me that something's wrong with me. Okay, and then I'm freaking out. Then this and that. The thing really is just don't freak out about anything. Know that there's nothing wrong. No, there's nothing really structural. Obviously, if I'm completely inflamed, you might need a medicine to kind of seal up the ulcers before you go and use this approach. But the thing is that to a large extent, I mean, other than in a crisis, this chronic problem is really the thing of I'm freaking out and I'm depressing my own ability to anti-inflame myself is really what's going on. And the thing is too, as I'm talking about this, my body is sending fear signals to my stomach. So I can feel like my stomach's afraid because it's like, oh, now the pressure's on. You just said you're doing well. You're going to bleed. So the thing to remember is that, it's this thing where the body is we're just afraid. We're just scared. And there's all these perceptual effects. And so as I'm thinking about this, my stomach was feeling funny. And that's the idiomotor effect. You've experienced this every time you're about to go to the dentist, all of a sudden your teeth hurt. Because you're focused on something. I haven't had a twinge in my stomach all day until I've just thought about it now and I'm talking to you. Because it's like it draws the fear, the pressure, draws our attention to things. It brings tension and attention to things. And so that's the thing. And the thing is, it's like even on these physical levels, we can overcome symptoms because we let the mind naturally anti-inflame and the body naturally anti-inflame itself by not reacting, by letting the things pass by realizing we're not in danger, that there's nothing wrong. And so the reason why I bring this up is because I'm in this class and I watched Dan Buglio's video about how to not perceive one's thoughts, one's feelings, one's everything as dangerous. And I realized that as I watched this video, I go to my friend's house. They're having a party. I was able to look at everyone in the face. There was almost no reaction at all to scruples. There was no attraction to anyone. There was nothing. It was just complete clarity and freedom because I didn't view anything as dangerous. There was nothing being amplified. Everything was able to go by. Martin Luther had this quote. He said, "We can't prevent the birds from flying over our head, but we can prevent them from making a nest in our hair." The thing to really remember, though, is that when we're really in a state that's not fearful, nothing even blips on the radar because nothing's important. So we just kind of live our life and we're just kind of free, and it just doesn't matter. Like we don't even have to fight with the temptation because the temptation, it doesn't matter because we're just not thinking about it. We're just like, oh, I'm fine and not dangerous. It doesn't even register. It's not being amplified, so we don't have to be afraid. I was like, oh no, I'm gonna be attracted to that person. Oh no, I have to look away. Oh no, it's like, it doesn't matter. It's truly not looking at the other person in a sense. And some people might be called to mortify their eyes and do these type of things. But the thing is, I don't think we're ever called to be afraid. Be not afraid. It's part of the whole thing. It's like we're not called to fear anyone. And if we want to understand, okay, the things I heard. So St. Alphonsus also says, ignore all the first movements of sin. That's why doctors can treat patients and look at their bodies. That's why priests can hear confessions. That's why all these things, just ignore everything else that's happening. And you just ignore all the first movements of sin because they're not dangerous. So I wanted to share that story because that shows that eliminating the perceived danger to our thoughts and feelings, because the ultimate thing to realize is that the first movements of sin are not dangerous because they don't involve the consent of our will. And this is a thing too for people who are scrupulous to remember, that there are things that can pop into our minds and that the appetites can attach to them without that being consent. That's called apparent consent. So, for example, if I'm angry at Jim, I see Jim, all of a sudden anger rises in me. That doesn't mean I've consented to the movement of anger. It means that the movement of anger is there. It means that, like, when I see Jim, or even if an angry thought goes past my head, there may be a sense of anger rising to meet it. That appetite is reaching out toward it. It doesn't mean that I've yet consented to that thought, because there is some type of an initial response that thought like resonates with an appetite. It doesn't mean you've eaten food if a piece of it doesn't mean you've decided to taste food if it's placed in your mouth. Your tongue is going to taste chicken wing. It doesn't mean if you're supposed to be a vegetarian and you just somebody puts a chicken wing on your tongue, you still have to taste it. It doesn't mean you've chosen to eat the chicken. Like, so it's like, so you haven't done anything wrong. That's the analogy. So it's very helpful too to realize that these first movements of sin are not dangerous. And so that's the really important thing to remember, that even the beginnings of the hypnosis that happens in attraction or something like that, it's not dangerous. It doesn't matter. And then it's really important to remember that, amplified thoughts. I mean, I think actually, if you think about it, the fact that the thought is amplified by fear reduces the culpability, because it's like you're not culpable because you're in this bizarre mental state where it's like you don't want the thing, therefore it's happening. It's like that's not like that's going to reduce culpability, and also that's not full consent of the will. That's amplification into the perceptual field, which then makes those appetites like, so if I say, okay, I don't want to be angry with Jim. Oh no, anger with Jim pops in. I feels angry with Jim, then it amplifies it out of fear, right into my head, because it seems like, but really what's happening is the fear appetite and the anger appetite are launching that in. And the same thing with any type of impulse to impurity, same thing with anything like that. It launches these things up into the grill of your mind and makes you feel that you've consented to it. And then because you're in this state of fear, your frontal lobe is starting to turn off, and then you then can't figure out if you've consented to it or not. So we really have three phases here that I wanted to emphasize. At the beginning, we have this first phase in which you have the sense of like we want to always just be seeing through the beginnings of the hypnosis. Like we don't want to be attracted to anybody. Just okay, I don't. This is just hypnosis. I can see past it. Okay. Then remember, okay, fear is the big thing, amplifying the perceptions, launching them into your grill of your mind. And you're not consenting to that because it's just launching these things in because they're amplified. And don't worry, you're not in danger in these phases. It's safe. Then the other thing to remember is that when in doubt, it doesn't count. So the thing is that these fear things, these amplifications, turn off the frontal lobe of the brain because the midbrain is kind of, I think that the inner limbic system is like screaming. So it's going to turn off your frontal lobes. That's why you can't figure out whether you've sinned or not, because the frontal lobe is probably off due to the fear. So the thing to remember is that when you are in doubt, it doesn't count. Because, so for example, you don't know, and there's many things that say like, okay, if a scrupulous person is not certain that they've lost the grace of God, they can be certain that they have not lost the grace of God. I read that in a book called Scruples and Sainthood. Also, it says when you are not certain if there is an obligation to do something, that sounds terrifying, but you can be certain that you do not have an obligation to do it. So don't go around through life with a conscience like, oh, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's not. Just say, okay, if I'm confused about this obligation to do this or that, obviously, within the context of a generally well-formed Catholic conscience, doesn't mean like, okay, like, do I kill people or not? Like, within the norm, like, if you are practicing the faith in a normal way, you can use this principle of when in doubt, it doesn't count, or liberty in doubt. And one of my most favorite parts of the idea of liberty in doubt, which I just found, is that you may proceed without dread of sin. I think that's the most important thing to remember, because the thing is, I would kind of say, okay, well, when in doubt, it doesn't count. Okay, I'm still going to go to communion, but I will still dread. I dread. So the thing is, like, so you may proceed without dread, is the idea. So that's the most important things. You want to know you can see through these things. You don't have to be attracted to anybody. You don't need. If fear is the thing that's amplifying everything and throwing it into your grill and making the things keep being remembered. And it's also like PTSD. Like so it's like a flashbulb memory. Okay, like if you're afraid of something, it keeps coming back. And don't worry, that if you're afraid of, you're not consenting or entertaining a thought. You're just, if you're afraid, the thing's going to keep coming back just neurochemically, because it's like, okay, you got all these chemicals came out when you thought about that thing, and so okay, the mind's like, oh, where is it? Oh, that's important. Oh, that's dangerous. Oh no, you're not safe. It's going to keep coming up into your mind. So that's another thing to remember there. Um, and then just remembering that, like, if you're confused about whether you committed a mortal sin, and remembering that the criteria are lack of any impairment. So obviously if you're half asleep, um, gun to your head, these type of things, they can impair your culpability, first of all. um, but then we have full consent to the will. So the first thing would be sufficient reflection or full knowledge. So for example, um, like if a lion jumps out of the bathroom and you're like, ah, and you curse, that's not you're not in your right mind at that minute. Um you didn't sufficiently reflect on that, or if you full consent to the will, like you didn't fully consent to it, um you didn't want the thought, that's not fully a sin. Then also grave matter, it has to be something that's a violation of the commandments. And the thing also, like, and the thing is really, like, on things of impurity, we don't like get away with it. Like, you can't be a little bit impure. But the thing is that it's not like that with that type of a sin. The thing really is that, because they say that there's no paucity of matter. Like, um, there's no little. Like, you can't have a small. Okay, like you can't have a little bit of. You can't use a little bit of pornography. In other words, and it's not that bad. The thing is with those sins, it's those type of sins, or you can't lust a little bit. The thing really is in those type of sins, it's we want to avoid those things we want to avoid those things through not worrying about them, not focusing on them, not through the things of, like, okay, um, and yeah, just not being creepy, those type of things. Like, just you just live a different type of a life, and you don't worry about whether you're being impure or not. Like, you just live a life of service as best you can, and you don't just be fearless about, just don't be afraid of these impulses in ourselves, and just live a healthy and balanced life without fear, because fear is destructive. And that's the thing, we want to love other people, we want to do that, we want to serve. That's the real thing. Just ignore all the first movements of sin. Ignore all the first movements of sin, and love God and love your neighbor. um, and these things, it's not like, it's not like these go against things that are said by the church. It's just, I think it gives us a deeper understanding of the psychological dynamics of some of these things. um, and it actually lets us put in practice some of the things that Saint Alphonsus said about, like, ignoring the first movements. And Saint Francis de Sales talks about, it's like we often imagine that we are overthrown by a temptation, but it's really just apparent consent. It's like, it's just those initial appetites. You're angry. You see that the thought of Jim goes by your mind. The anger rises up. You think you consented. No, that was just the appetite met it. So those are some things I wanted to share. Some other things that you might want to think about in this are the fact, like, going out and being bold is also something. Like, so whether I was going around, I was praying for other people for healing. I was, talking with people that, like, that might it might. And the thing is, you don't want to talk to people to see whether you don't have symptoms. You want to just step out and live out of the freedom. You want to walk out the freedom you have. And the thing is this, that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The whole technique is not to use a technique to like change this. The thing is to understand that you have nothing wrong with you. You don't have a conditioned mind. You're just in a trance. The thing is that you are free now, and you have to walk out that freedom that you already have, because it's like, that's the thing, is just acting on the freedom that you already have and living a life of goodness and service and all these things. It's not, it's that the truth, you will know the truth. Maybe there's a marginal reminding of yourself of the truth. That is a helpful technique, but you don't need to, like, be like, there's a video, poor kid on the on Funniest Home Videos, where he's on a roller coaster, and he's telling himself, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. And then the roller coaster goes up and the poor kid is going, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. That's not how we need to go through life. We know the truth. And you may need to slightly remind yourself when there's, okay, no, no, no. I'm safe. I'm safe. But it's not that you need to say, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. Yeah, I'm safe, I'm safe. This is a technique. No, it's a truth. You will know the truth. Not you will frantically remind yourself of the truth and it will set you free. You will know the truth and it will set you free. And this is the thing, understanding, it's right knowledge of what the symptoms are will release you from everything. Realizing you don't have to be attracted to anybody. Realizing that you don't have to, that concupiscence doesn't mean that like you're going to be attracted to everyone you see. Realizing that these things, interpreting these things in a healthy way, understanding expectancy effects and all these different things will set you free because it is the truth that will set you free about these things. So I hope this is helpful in giving you the anatomy of scrupulosity and some ways that you can reduce this inflammation, so to speak, in different areas of your life, whether it's in your mind or in your body. It's like there's so many things that can be gained by not being afraid. So the thing is, be not afraid, and the truth will set you free. So thank you for listening to this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I hope you have an excellent day. All right, bye.